The smell of lavender polish always reminds me of that Tuesday. I was sitting at the oak dining table, the same one where I used to help Leo with his fractions when he was 8, polishing the silver spoons. I wanted everything to be perfect. A mother spends 28 years preparing for her son's wedding day, even if she doesn't realize it. Every scraped knee I bandaged, every late-night fever I watched over, every sacrifice I made as a single mother, it was all leading to this. The moment I would see my only son, my Leo, stand at the altar and become a man of his own. I had my dress hanging on the back of my bedroom door for 3 months. A soft champagne silk. Not too bright to outshine the bride, but elegant enough so Leo would look at me and feel proud. I remember looking at the calendar on the fridge, the one held up by a faded magnet he bought me in 4th grade during a school trip to the zoo. The date was circled in red, Saturday, the 15th. I had the flight booked. I had the hotel reservation printed out and tucked into my Bible. I had even practiced my toast in the shower, over and over, until the words felt like part of my breathing. To the boy who gave me a reason to wake up, I would say, I could already see the tears in his eyes. Leo was always sensitive, a trait he got from me. Or so I thought. That afternoon, I decided to call Elena his fiancée. I liked Elena, or I forced myself to like her because she was his choice. She was modern, efficient, and always seemed to have a wall up, but I respected her. I wanted to ask her one last time about the ceremony schedule. I needed to know exactly when the car would pick me up from the hotel. I wanted to be there early, perhaps to help her with her veil, or just to sit in the back and pray before the guests arrived. When she answered the phone, her voice was clipped, busy, the sound of someone shuffling papers. "Elena, dear," I said, my voice warm with that maternal excitement I couldn't suppress. "I was just checking my notes. I know I have the date for Saturday, but I realize I never wrote down the exact hour for the ceremony. I don't want to be a minute late for you and Leo." There was a silence on the other end. Not a short silence, but the kind of heavy, suffocating void that makes your heart start to race before your brain knows why. I heard a muffled sound, like she was moving into another room. Then her voice came back, devoid of any warmth, sounding as cold as a winter morning. "Oh," she said, just oh. Then, after a pause that felt like an eternity, she spoke the words that shattered the last 30 years of my life into a million jagged pieces. "We already got married yesterday, Margaret. We decided to keep it small. Just us and a few friends. We didn't want the fuss." The silver spoon I was holding slipped from my fingers and hit the hardwood floor with a dull, metallic clang. The sound echoed through the empty house. Yesterday. They got married yesterday. While I was polishing silver. While I was dreaming of champagne silk. While I was praying for their future. My son, the boy I carried, the man I built, had stood before a witness and promised his life to someone, and he hadn't even told me the time had changed. He hadn't told me I wasn't invited to the life he was starting. I felt the air leave my lungs. I tried to speak, but my throat felt like it was filled with sand. My mind raced back to every conversation we'd had in the last month. He had sounded normal. A bit stressed, maybe, but normal. He had said, "See you soon, Mom." He had lied. He had looked at the calendar and known that I was preparing for a day that would never come for me. The betrayal didn't hit me as a sharp pain at first. It was a cold, numbing wave that started at my toes and moved upward, freezing my blood. I looked at the champagne dress through the open bedroom door. It looked like a ghost hanging there. A ghost of a mother who no longer had a place. I wanted to scream, to ask her why, to demand to speak to my son, but all I could do was lean against the table so I wouldn't collapse. How does a son forget his mother on the day of his wedding? Or worse, how does a son intentionally decide she shouldn't be there? The silence that followed Elena's words wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest until I could hear the rhythmic thumping of my own heart, mocking me. I stayed there, leaning against the table, for what felt like hours after the line went dead. I didn't even remember hanging up. My eyes were fixed on a small scratch on the surface of the wood, a mark Leo had made with a toy truck when he was 5. I remember how I hadn't even been mad then. I had laughed, ruffled his hair, and told him it was okay, that the house was meant to be lived in. I had spent my whole life making sure the house of our relationship was sturdy, warm, and safe. But as I stood there in the chilling quiet of my dining room, I realized the foundations had been rotting for a long time, and I had simply refused to smell the decay. I began to replay the last year in my mind, searching for the cracks I must have stepped over. There was that dinner last Christmas. I had spent 3 days preparing his favorite brisket, the one that falls apart at the touch of a fork. When they arrived, 2 hours late, Leo seemed distracted. He kept checking his watch, his eyes darting to Elena every time I started a story about his childhood. I thought it was just the stress of his new job at the law firm. I told myself that young men in their 20s are supposed to be restless. When I tried to show Elena the photo albums, the ones with Leo in his Little League uniform, or the one where he's covered in flour, helping me bake cookies, she had smiled politely. But her eyes remained cold, professional. She had looked at those memories, not as a bridge to join our families, but as a clutter she needed to clear away. "Mom, we really should get going," Leo had said, barely halfway through his dessert. He hadn't even finished the peach cobbler he used to beg for. "But it's early, honey. I haven't even told Elena about the time you got lost in the corn maze," I had pleaded, my voice thin. "Another time, Mom." "We have a lot on our plate," he'd replied, already reaching for his coat. I remember the way he didn't look me in the eye when he kissed my cheek. It was a glancing blow, a practiced motion of affection that lacked the soul of the son I knew. I had dismissed it. I had blamed the city life, the pressure, the fast-paced world they lived in. I was the old-fashioned mother, I told myself. I needed to give them space. Then there were the phone calls. They started getting shorter. "Hey, Mom, can't talk, just checking in. Love you, bye." I would spend all week saving up little nuggets of news: the neighbor's cat, the new rose bushes I planted, the way the light hit the kitchen in the morning only to have them dismissed in 30 seconds. I started to feel like a chore on his to-do list. Call mom. Check. I was a box to be ticked, not a person to be heard. 3 months ago, when I asked about the wedding invitations, Leo had been vague. "Oh, Elena is handling the guest list, Mom. It's mostly her family's connections and some work people. Don't worry about it. We'll send you yours soon." I waited by the mailbox every day for 2 weeks. I watched the mailman come and go, bringing bills and flyers, but never that thick, creamy envelope with the elegant calligraphy I imagined. When I finally asked him about it, he sounded annoyed. "Mom, you're the mother of the groom. You don't need a formal invitation. You know when it is." I had clung to that. "You know when it is." I thought it was an intimacy, a sign that I was so central to the event that a piece of paper was redundant. I didn't see it for what it was, a strategy to keep me in the dark. A way to ensure I didn't have the details, the venue address, or the schedule. Every time I tried to offer help with the flowers, the catering, the seating chart, I was rebuffed with a "we've got it covered." I thought they were being independent. I thought they were being considerate, wanting me to just enjoy the day as a guest of honor. How blind can a mother be? I had ignored the way Leo stopped calling me Mommy, even in private. I had ignored the way he stopped asking for my advice on anything, from his career to his car. I had ignored the fact that in every photo they posted on social media, photos my neighbor had to show me because I didn't want to intrude on their digital lives. They looked like a closed circle, a fortress. And I was standing outside the gates, shivering, convinced that the door was just stuck, not locked. I looked down at the silver spoons again. They were shining, reflecting the light from the window. I had polished them for a ghost. I had been living in a curated memory of my son, while the real man had been slowly, methodically, cutting the umbilical cord that I thought was unbreakable. The signs weren't small. They were sirens, and I had simply covered my ears and sang myself a lullaby. The silence of the house began to ring in my ears, a high-pitched frequency of loneliness that made me want to scrub the floors until my knuckles bled, just to feel something else. I stood up from the table, my legs feeling like lead, and walked toward the hallway where the framed photos lived. There was one of Leo's graduation. He was beaming, his arm draped over my shoulder, whispering that he'd never have made it without me. At least, that's what I remember him saying. Now, looking at his frozen smile, I wonder if I imagined the warmth in his voice even then. Was I already becoming a ghost in his life while he was still living under my roof? I think back to 6 months ago, during a brief Sunday visit. Elena had stayed in the car, claiming she had an urgent work call, leaving Leo to come inside alone. He didn't sit down. He paced the kitchen like a caged animal, picking up the ceramic salt shaker and putting it back down, never in the right spot. I had made his favorite lemonade, the one with the sprig of mint from the garden. He took one sip and set it aside, the ice melting and sweating onto my lace coaster. "Mom, Elena, and I have been talking about the future," he had said, his voice devoid of its usual melody. We think it's important to establish boundaries. You know, for the health of the relationship. Modern couples need their own orbit. I had laughed then, a soft, naive sound. Boundaries. Leo, I'm your mother, not a stranger. I don't need an orbit. I just need a seat at the table. He didn't laugh back. He looked at the floor, his jaw tight, a gesture he inherited from a father who left us before Leo could even walk. Just don't be surprised if things change, okay? Elena's family does things differently. They aren't as intense as you. Intense. That word had stung, a tiny needle prick to the heart. I had spent 28 years being intense about his happiness, his safety, his education. I was intense about making sure he had a warm coat in winter and a sense of belonging in a world that can be so cold. If my love was a burden, he had never mentioned it when he needed my grocery money to get through his first year of law school. He hadn't found me intense when I stayed up 3 nights straight helping him proofread his thesis. Then there were the invitations. A month ago, I saw a post on Elena's cousin's public profile, a photo of a beautiful, thick card with gold foil edges. The countdown begins, the caption read. I had waited for my version to arrive. I checked the mail twice a day, even in the rain, convinced the post office had simply misplaced mine. When I eventually called Leo to ask about the dress code, he was clipped. Wear whatever makes you comfortable, Mom. It's not a royal ball. He didn't mention the venue. He didn't mention the time. He just said Saturday. I realize now that the distance wasn't a sudden chasm. It was a slow erosion. Every time Elena suggested a restaurant I couldn't afford, every time they forgot to include me in a group text, every time Leo stopped using our secret nicknames, it was a brick being laid in a wall I refused to see. I had been so busy building a pedestal for him that I didn't notice he was using it to climb out of my reach. I walked into the kitchen and saw the wedding gift I had prepared sitting on the counter. A set of vintage crystal glasses that belonged to my grandmother. I had wrapped them in white tissue paper, taping the edges with a precision that only a mother's love provides. I had written a card to my son and his new life. May your home always be full of the light these glasses catch. I looked at that box now, and it felt like a coffin. A small, square coffin for a relationship I thought was immortal. The realization that they had already stood before a priest, or a judge, or whoever they chose, and that I was the only person in their world who didn't know. It wasn't just a slight. It was an eviction. I had been evicted from my role as his mother, replaced by a version of him that didn't need me, didn't want me, and felt that my presence would somehow contaminate the perfect life he was building with her. I looked at my hands, still smelling of lavender polish, and for the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger in my own home, entendido, dieter. Agora entramos no territorio Donagaca dolorosa, o bloco 3 explora como essa me tenta justificar. O injustificável, agarrando-se a migalhas de esperança para não aceita que foi descartada. Block 3, Faith, Sacrifice, or Denial English version. I sat there for hours, the shadows of the late afternoon stretching across the kitchen floor like long, accusing fingers. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was a desperate, clawing need to find an excuse for him. Maybe it was a surprise, I whispered to the empty room. Maybe they had a legal reason to do it early. Maybe Leo is planning a second, bigger ceremony for the family, and Elena just phrased it poorly. I grabbed onto these thoughts like a drowning person grabs at driftwood. I couldn't accept that the boy I had tucked in every night, the one whose heartbeat I had listened to before he even saw the light of day, would intentionally keep me from his wedding. I picked up the phone again, my fingers trembling so much I almost dropped it. I didn't call Leo. I called my sister, Martha. I needed someone to tell me I was being dramatic, that I had misunderstood. Martha, I just talked to Elena. I started, my voice cracking. She said they got married yesterday, is. Did you know? Was there a change of plans? There was a pause, a long, heavy sigh that told me everything I didn't want to hear. Margaret. Oh, honey. Leo called me last week. He told me they were doing a private elopement because things were too tense with the family expectations. I thought he had told you. I assumed you were part of the secret. The word tense again. It was the weapon they used to cut me out. I felt a surge of heat in my chest. A secret? Martha, I'm his mother. How can a mother be a family expectation to be avoided? He loves you, Margaret, but you know how Elena is. She wants control. And Leo, he just wants peace, at the cost of my soul. But even then, the denial didn't break. Instead, it transformed into a sacrificial resolve. I decided that if they had married in secret to avoid stress, then I would be the most supportive, least stressful mother in history. I would prove to them that I wasn't the burden they feared. I would show them that I could be the silent pillar they needed. I went to my bank account online. I looked at the balance. It wasn't much, just the savings I had scraped together from my years working at the library, plus the small life insurance policy from when my mother passed. I had planned to give them $5,000 as a wedding gift to help with the down payment on their new house. It was meant to be a surprise on Saturday. I stood up and grabbed my car keys. My mind was spinning. If I give them the money now, I reasoned, they'll see I'm not angry. They'll see I only want their happiness. They'll realize they made a mistake by excluding me, and they'll invite me over tonight to celebrate. It was a pathetic hope, a bribe disguised as a blessing. I drove to the bank in a daze, withdrew the cash in crisp $100 bills, and put them in a beautiful cream envelope. I even stopped at the florist and bought the most expensive arrangement of white lilies, Elena's favorite, or so I remembered him saying. As I drove toward their apartment, the city lights blurred through the tears I refused to let fall. I told myself I was being the bigger person. I told myself that a mother's love is measured by what she can endure without complaining. I was going to walk up to their door, hand them the gift, hug my son, and tell him it was okay. I was going to forgive him before he even asked for it. I parked blocks away because I was afraid they'd see my car and not answer the door. Walking those 2 blocks felt like a pilgrimage. Every step was a prayer. Please let him look at me with love. Please let this be a misunderstanding. Please don't let me be alone. I reached the lobby of their high-rise building. The doorman knew me. He let me up with a sympathetic smile that felt like a slap in the face. Did he know too? Had he seen them leave yesterday in their tuxedo and white dress while I was at home praying? Standing in front of apartment for B, the lilies felt heavy in my arms. I could hear music inside, something jazz, soft and sophisticated. I could hear laughter, Eleanor's laugh, and then the sound of my son's voice, clear and happy. He didn't sound like a man who was guilty. He didn't sound like a man who had lost his mother. He sounded like a man who had finally escaped. I stood there, my hand hovering over the doorbell, the cream envelope with $5,000, my life's security, clutched in my sweaty palm. I was ready to give them everything, just for a crumb of acknowledgement. I was ready to sacrifice my dignity on the altar of a son who had already moved on. The jazz music inside the apartment felt like a physical barrier, a sophisticated wall of sound that told me I didn't belong. I stood there, my knuckles inches from the polished mahogany door, feeling the cold air of the hallway seep into my bones. My mind was a battlefield of denial. Maybe they are just having a private dinner to decompress, I told myself. Maybe the real celebration is still happening on Saturday, and Eleanor just wanted to tease me. I knew it was a lie, a beautiful, fragile glass ornament of a thought that was destined to shatter, but I held onto it anyway. I needed it to survive the next 10 seconds. I looked down at the cream envelope in my hand. $5,000. To some, it was just a number, but to me, it was a decade of skipped vacations, of wearing the same winter coat for 7 years, of choosing the generic brand of coffee just so I could put a little more away for Leo's future. This was the money I had set aside for my own emergencies, for the day my old bones might finally give out. But standing there, I felt that my greatest emergency was the silence coming from my son. If I could just buy a minute of his time, a second of his genuine gaze, it would be worth every penny of my security. I finally pressed the doorbell. The chime was melodic, expensive, and it cut through the jazz like a knife. The laughter inside stopped instantly. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it was painful. I heard footsteps heavy, familiar. Leo's walk. He always dragged his left heel just a tiny bit when he was relaxed. The door opened, but only halfway. Leo stood there. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo, but a silk robe I didn't recognize. Behind him, the apartment was glowing with candlelight. The scent of expensive catering truffles and roasted garlic wafted out, making my stomach churn. He looked at me, and for a split second, I saw it. Not guilt, not love, but a flash of pure, unadulterated annoyance. It disappeared as quickly as it came, replaced by a mask of weary politeness. "Mom? What are you doing here?" "It's late," he said. He didn't open the door further. He stood in the gap, blocking my view of his new life. I brought flowers, I stammered, thrusting the white lilies forward. They felt like a white flag of surrender. And I wanted to give you this. For the wedding. For the house. I held out the envelope. He didn't take it at first. He looked at the envelope as if it were a dangerous object. Mom, we told you. We wanted it quiet. We needed space to just be us. Elena is exhausted from the planning, and we just wanted one night without any family drama. Drama, I whispered, the word tasting like bile. Leo, I'm not drama. I'm your mother. I just wanted to see you. I thought. Maybe there was a mistake about the date. He sighed, a long, theatrical sound that made me feel small. There was no mistake. We just decided to move it up. It was a spontaneous thing. We were going to call you tomorrow, once we'd had a chance to breathe. He was lying. I could see the pile of wedding cards on the sideboard behind him, dozens of them, already opened. They hadn't been spontaneous. They had planned this for months, invited everyone they deemed worthy, and systematically erased me from the guest list. And yet, the denial in me was so strong, so desperate, that I still reached out and tucked the envelope into his hand. Take it, please, I pleaded. It's for you. I just want you to be happy. If you want me to leave, I'll leave. I needed you to have this. He took the money. He felt the thickness of it, and for a moment, his eyes softened. But he didn't invite me in. He didn't offer me a glass of water, or a seat at the table I had helped build. He just leaned out, kissed my forehead with a dry, hurried touch, and said, "Thanks, Mom, truly. I'll call you in a few days, when things settle down. Get home safe, okay?" The door closed. Not with a bang, but with a soft, decisive click. I stood in the hallway, the smell of truffles fading, replaced by the sterile scent of the building's air freshener. I had given him my life savings, and in exchange, I had received a 10-second conversation in a doorway. I walked back to the elevator, my hands empty, my heart hollow, still trying to convince myself that he was just tired. That he still loved me. That Saturday was still coming. The next morning didn't bring the clarity I had hoped for. It only brought a cold, grey fog that seemed to settle inside my very bones. I woke up in my armchair, still wearing the coat I had worn to Leo's apartment. My neck ached, but the pain in my chest was louder, a dull throb that kept time with the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I reached for my phone, half expecting a message from him, a long, rambling apology, an explanation that would make sense of the coldness I had encountered at his door. But there was nothing. Only a notification from a social media app I rarely used, but had kept active just to catch glimpses of his life. I clicked on it, and my world tilted. It was a gallery of photos posted by Elena's sister. The caption read, "The most magical weekend with the people who matter most. Family is everything." I scrolled through them, my breath hitching in my throat. There they were. Dozens of photos from the day before the day they spontaneously got married. It wasn't a small, private elopement in a courthouse. It was a lavish, meticulously planned garden wedding at a private estate upstate. I saw Leo in a bespoke charcoal suit, looking more handsome than I had ever seen him. I saw Elena in a gown that must have cost more than my car, her veil trailing behind her like a silk river. But it wasn't the luxury that broke me. It was the faces in the crowd. There was Martha, my own sister, who had lied to my face over the phone, wearing a new navy dress and smiling as she held a glass of champagne. There were Leo's cousins. There were his law school friends. There was even his father, the man who had abandoned us when Leo was 3, the man I had worked 3 jobs to compensate for, the man who hadn't sent a birthday card in 20 years. He was there, standing next to Leo, his hand on my son's shoulder, as if he had been there all along. I felt a roar in my ears, a sound like a rushing train. I wasn't just forgotten. I was replaced. They had curated a family for that day, and in their version of the world, I was the only piece that didn't fit. I looked closer at a photo of the reception. On the tables, there were place cards. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred, searching for my name. I found the table where Martha and the cousins were sitting. There was an empty chair next to Martha. For a second, a spark of hope flickered maybe. They had intended for me to be there. But then I saw the card on that empty seat. It didn't say Margaret. It said reserved for memory. Beside it sat a framed photograph of Leo's grandmother, my mother. They had invited a dead woman to the wedding, but they hadn't invited the living mother, who was only 2 hours away, polishing silver spoons and praying for their joy. The shock was so physical, I felt my stomach heave. I ran to the bathroom and collapsed over the tiles, the cold porcelain, the only thing keeping me grounded. It was a performance. My exclusion wasn't a mistake of logistics. It was a statement of my worth in his new life. He had taken my $5,000 the night before money he clearly didn't need, looking at the scale of that wedding, and he had looked me in the eye while my sister sat in a garden 3 hours away, hiding the truth from me. I realized then that the family drama Leo was so desperate to avoid was simply me. My presence was a reminder of a past he wanted to bury, a past of struggle, of small apartments, of second-hand clothes, and of a mother whose love was perhaps too visible, too raw for the polished. Sterile world he now inhabited with Elena. I was the intense one because I remembered the boy who cried when he broke a toy, while they only wanted the man who won cases in court. I sat on the bathroom floor for a long time, staring at the screen of my phone until it went black. The betrayal felt like a thick, oily film over my skin. My own sister. My own son. The people who knew my heart the best had conspired to keep me in a state of pathetic, hopeful ignorance while they celebrated a new beginning that explicitly required my absence. I wasn't just a mother who wasn't invited. I was a secret they had successfully kept. I didn't call. I didn't send a frantic text. I didn't even cry anymore. The tears had dried into a salty mask that made my skin feel tight and artificial. I moved with a strange, surgical precision. I washed my face, put on that champagne silk dress, the one I had bought for a wedding I wasn't allowed to attend, and I drove. I didn't drive to their apartment. I knew they wouldn't be there. They were likely still at the estate, or perhaps already heading to an airport for a honeymoon paid for, in part, by the silence they bought from me. I drove to the one place I knew I could find the person who had held the knife while Leo twisted it, my sister Martha's house. When I arrived at her driveway, I saw her car. I walked to her front door, the silk of my dress rustling against my legs like a whisper of everything I had lost. I didn't knock. I used the spare key she'd given me years ago, the one meant for emergencies. This was an emergency of the soul. Martha was in her kitchen, humming a tune from the reception, a half-empty glass of wine on the counter. She was still wearing the navy dress from the photos. When she saw me standing there, in my wedding finery, her face went from a relaxed glow to the color of ash. The glass in her hand didn't break, but she set it down, so hard the wine splashed onto her fingers. "Margaret, what? What are you doing here? Why are you dressed like that?" Her voice trembled, the guilt already leaking out of her pores. "I'm dressed for my son's wedding, Martha," I said, my voice eerily calm, sounding like it was coming from someone else. "I'm just a little late. Or maybe I'm exactly on time for the truth. Margaret, listen, it wasn't my place to tell you," she started, the excuses tumbling out like a script she had practiced. "Leo asked me. He said you'd make it about yourself. He said you'd get too emotional and ruin Elena's vision of the day. I was just trying to keep the peace." I walked toward her, and for the first time in my life, I saw my sister flinch. "Keep the peace. You sat there. You ate the cake. You watched my son, the boy I raised, while you were busy with your own life, give his hand to a woman who hates me. You watched his father, a man who hasn't been a father for 25 years, take the seat of honor. And you didn't think to call me? You didn't think my sister is at home polishing silver for a ghost? He's a man now, Margaret. You smother him," she shouted, her guilt turning into a desperate attack. "He just wanted one day where he didn't have to be Margaret's miracle boy. He wanted to be Leo, not just Leo." The words hit me, but they didn't knock me down. I looked at her, and I realized that they all saw my love as a cage, when I had built it as a sanctuary. I took my phone out and showed her the photo of the reserved for memory chair. My mother was there, Martha. A photograph of a dead woman was more welcome than the woman who gave him life. Did you toast to her? Did you tell her how beautiful the garden was? I didn't wait for her answer. I turned and walked out, but I wasn't done. I drove to Leo's apartment. I knew he was there because his car was in the lot. I didn't care if I was interrupting their perfect first morning. I walked up, and this time I didn't ring the bell. I hammered on the door until he opened it. He looked tired. He looked disheveled. And when he saw me in that dress, he knew. The mask fell off. "Mom, please." "Not now," he groaned, leaning against the doorframe. "I gave you $5,000 yesterday, Leo," I said, stepping into his space, forcing him to look at me. "I gave you the last of my security because I thought you were struggling with a spontaneous decision. But I saw the photos. I saw the estate. I saw your father. Tell me, did my $5,000 pay for the champagne he drank? Or was it for the flowers on the chair where I was supposed to sit? It wasn't like that, he hissed, looking back into the apartment, worried about Elena waking up. We wanted a specific vibe. You don't fit into her world, Mom. You're too much. You're always too much. I was too much when you needed your tuition paid. I was too much when I worked double shifts so you could have the right suit for your interviews, I whispered, my voice finally breaking. I am the woman who made you. And you traded me for a vibe. You didn't just exclude me from a party, Leo. You excluded me from your humanity. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small velvet box I had carried. It was his grandfather's watch. I had meant to give it to him before the ceremony. I looked at it, then at him, and I realized he didn't deserve the time it kept. I put it back in my bag. Enjoy your life, Leo. It's a beautiful, expensive life. But remember this, one day you might have a child. And I hope, for your sake, they never look at you and see a vibe instead of a father. I turned around and walked away. I didn't look back to see if he was watching. I didn't want to see his face anymore. I had spent 28 years looking for myself in his eyes, only to realize I was looking at a mirror that had never truly reflected me. The drive back to my house was a blur of streetlights and shadows. I don't remember taking the keys out of the ignition or walking through the front door. I only remember the silence. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a quiet home. It was a thick, suffocating presence, like a heavy velvet curtain that had fallen over my entire life. I walked into the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had polished the silver only 24 hours ago, and I looked at the champagne silk dress in the reflection of the oven door. I looked like a queen of a kingdom that had burned to the ground. I reached behind my back, unzipped the dress, and let it fall to the floor. I left it there a puddle of expensive silk on the linoleum and walked to my bedroom in my slip. I climbed into bed, but I didn't turn off the light. I couldn't. In the dark, the images from the photos would be even sharper. I could still see the reserved for memory card. I could still see my sister's face, flushed with wine and betrayal. But mostly, I saw Leo's eyes. Not the eyes of my little boy, but the eyes of a stranger who looked at me and saw an obstacle to his happiness. The next few days were a lesson in ghosthood. I stayed in bed for the first 48 hours, watching the sun move across the wall. The phone didn't ring. No text came from Leo. No apology from Martha. It's funny how, when you finally speak the truth, the people who were lying to you don't try to win you back, they just resent you for making them feel guilty. I realized then that my silence had been their comfort. As long as I was the clueless mother, they could be the perfect family. By knowing the truth, I had ruined their game. On the third day, I forced myself to get up. I walked to the kitchen and saw the champagne dress still lying on the floor. It looked like a dead skin I had shed. I picked it up, took it to the backyard, and threw it in the trash bin. I didn't want it in my closet. I didn't want to see it every time I got dressed, reminding me of the day I was erased. I went to the dining room and looked at the oak table. I began to clear it. I took the silver spoons, the ones I had polished so carefully, and put them back in their felt-lined box. I took down the photos of Leo from the hallway. Not because I hated him, but because I couldn't breathe with those frozen memories watching me. I saw the photo of him at 5, with the scratch on the table. I realized I had spent 23 years trying to protect a boy who no longer existed. The man he had become didn't need my protection. He didn't even want my presence. The hardest part was the grocery store. I found myself reaching for the cereal he liked, the extra-large pack of chicken breasts, the snacks I always kept in the pantry, just in case he stopped by. I stood in the aisle, my hand hovering over a box of granola, and I felt a sob catch in my throat. He wasn't coming by. He hadn't come by in months, and he wouldn't come by now. I was shopping for a ghost. I put the cereal back and bought a small carton of milk and a single apple. The transition from us to me was a series of small, sharp cuts. I spent my evenings sitting on the porch, watching the neighborhood kids play. I wondered if their mothers knew. I wondered if they realized that every sandwich made, every bedtime story read, every sacrifice offered was just a deposit into a bank account that could be closed without notice. I wasn't bitter, not exactly. I was just hollowed out. I began to realize that for 28 years, Leo had been the sun at the center of my solar system. My schedule, my finances, my emotions, my very identity, everything orbited around him. And now that the sun had gone out, I was drifting in deep space. I didn't know who Margaret was without Leo's mom attached to it. I had to learn how to exist without being needed. It was a terrifying freedom. One evening, Martha sent a text. It wasn't an apology. It was defensive. I hope you're happy now that you've made everyone feel terrible. Leo is very hurt by what you said at his door. He just wanted a fresh start. I read it, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I didn't feel the need to beg for her understanding. I simply deleted the message and blocked her number. If my presence was too much for their world, then their drama was now too little for mine. It has been 6 months since the day I was erased from my son's life. The seasons have changed, and the vibrant greens of the garden, where he was supposed to marry, have turned into the brittle, honest brown of autumn. For a long time, I expected the doorbell to ring. I expected Leo to stand there, humbled by the realization of what he had done, ready to beg for the forgiveness I had once been so eager to give. But that knock never came. And the most surprising thing isn't the silence from him, it's the peace I've found within it. I spent nearly 3 decades building a monument to my son, only to realize I was living in its shadow. One afternoon, I sat in the park with a book, not a parenting book, not a cookbook, but a novel I had wanted to read for years. I realized that no one in that park knew I was a rejected mother. To the stranger on the bench, I was just a woman enjoying the breeze. There was a profound, quiet power in that. My worth was no longer tied to a man who saw me as an inconvenience. I took the $5,000 back from the joint account I had put it in after he didn't return it. I didn't save it for his future this time. Instead, I used a portion of it to repaint the house. I chose colors he would have hated, vibrant teals and warm terracottas colors that reflected my spirit, not his preferences. I turned his old bedroom, the one I had kept like a museum, into an art studio. I started painting again, a hobby I had abandoned the day I found out I was pregnant with him. My hands, once busy with his laundry and his meals, are now stained with cobalt blue and burnt sienna. I am creating something that belongs only to me. I received an invitation in the mail yesterday. It wasn't from Leo. It was from a local charity where I've started volunteering. They needed someone with wisdom and patience to help young women navigating life on their own. For the first time in years, I felt seen for who I am, not for what I could provide to a son who took it all for granted. I am learning that love is not a transaction where you give everything and hope for a return. Love is a gift, and if the receiver throws it away, the beauty remains with the giver. I still think of Leo. I pray for him every night, not out of obligation, but because you cannot simply switch off 28 years of devotion. I hope he is happy. I hope Elena's vibe is enough to sustain him when life gets difficult. But I no longer wait for his call. I have realized that my job as his mother ended not when he got married, but when I decided that I deserved to be more than a footnote in someone else's story. I looked at the silver spoons one last time before I took them to a local antique shop. I sold them. The man behind the counter asked if they were a family heirloom. I smiled and said they were part of a past life. I'm traveling lighter now. With the money, I bought a ticket to the coast. I want to see the ocean. I want to stand where the land ends and the horizon begins, reminded that the world is vast and that my life is not over just because one chapter closed with a slammed door. As I locked the front door of my house to head to the airport, I didn't look back. The perfect beginning I had imagined for Leo's wedding was a lie, but the beginning I am creating for myself is real. It is slow, it is quiet, and it is mine. I am Margaret. I am a painter. I am a traveler. And finally, I am free.